Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for September 17th, 2018. On today's episode, we're going to go and talk about what we've been up to at the water cooler. This is Slash Film Editor-in-Chief Peter Sciretta, and joining me on today's podcast is the entire team for once in a few weeks now. We have Slash Film Managing Editor Jacob Hall.
Hello, hello.
Weekend Editor Brad Oman.
Hey, that's me.
Senior Editor Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on?
Writers Hoai-Tran.
Hey, everyone.
And Chris Evangelista.
Hello.
Okay, guys, let's get into this. Let's talk about what we've been doing. The most interesting thing that I did this past week was I went to Universal Studios Hollywood's Halloween Horror Nights 2018. For those of you who don't know, they have these events at theme parks and around the country where basically you go into these like haunted houses, which they call mazes, and they also have like these scare zones in between the haunted houses, which are kind of themed, and there's a bunch of atmosphere and people are, running and jumping out at you and stuff like that. Universal, I think, kind of was one of the big pioneers of this back in the day with their Orlando Halloween Horror Nights event. I know that is considered to be one of the gold standards. Universal Studios Hollywood, just like the theme parks in general, is much smaller and not as grand in production. But I enjoy these. I've been going to these since I've moved to LA. I'm not a big horror guy. Like, I know Chris and Jacob are huge horror guys. But I think I probably skip more horror movies than I actually seek out that come out in theaters. But I do enjoy going to these events because it really does put you into the movies. I am a big theme park guy. I love the immersion aspect, and I love being able to step into these worlds. This year at Halloween Horror Nights, they had 8 or 9 different attractions, considering if you consider the Walking Dead attraction that's always there as one of the mazes, then it would be 9. But probably the best one that I experienced is this year they had a maze based on the season 1 of Stranger Things, which was really cool to walk through kind of the events of that season and, to be in the Upside Down while Eleven is taking... Oh, is there spoilers for Stranger Things? I don't know.
Season 1 was 2 years ago. You're fine.
As Eleven is taking out the Demogorgon in the classroom, it was probably not the scariest maze, but it was probably my favorite and the best for me. I think that is one of the big problems that Universal Studios has with these events is in the Hollywood version, 8 out of the 9 houses are based on pre-existing horror IP, whereas in Orlando, I think 5 out of the 10 are based on horror IP, so they have 5 original mazes. We had 1 original here, and what that means is good. It's part good and part bad. The good is that you get excited to go to these mazes because they're based on things you know of and you are excited for, and you want to come face to face with the Demogorgon. You want to come face to face with Mike Myers. Like you want to be in these worlds. But the bad part of having all these IP based mazes is they, for the most part, stick to the storyline of the movies. So there isn't a lot of creative room that the Universal creatives have to play around in, presenting fun scares and stuff. They're kind of just adapting it to a walkthrough experience, if that makes any sense. So one of these days I want to get to Orlando. I enjoyed this. There has been a lot of criticism in past years of this event has gotten too big and bloated and the lines are too long, and walking through the mazes have been like, too many people in the mazes. So you're kind of like in a line in the maze and seeing all the scares happen before you even get to them. This year, I think, at least my experience, it could have been a fluke, but they staggered the people into the mazes more, and it was more of a, you felt like you were actually getting your money's worth out of the mazes. The scare zones themselves are a little more disappointing for me, but I had a lot of fun, and I'm going to go to the Not Scary Farm event this week, and I will have a comparison article on the site that you can read and find out all my thoughts on Halloween Horror Nights. But yes, so Chris, you've been away in Toronto.
I sure have. I was at TIFF for the last few days last week, and it was great. I think I have like postpartum depression now because I spent the whole year thinking about going to TIFF, and now it's over, and it's like, oh, all right, back to the grind. But but Toronto is great. I love going to Toronto. It's great for many reasons. For one thing, it's Canada, so everyone is very nice. For another, Donald Trump isn't president there, so that's a big plus. And just walking around Toronto. I mean, I live in like the suburbs, so I don't really get much of a city experience. But when I'm in Toronto for TIFF, it forces me to walk around and take public transportation and all that stuff, which I don't really do normally. So it's a nice change of pace.
And it feels like a clean version of New York City.
It does, and it's not nearly as New York City, when you try and walk around there, it can be a little overwhelming where you feel like you're like being herded like cattle into areas. But Toronto, it's a little more open. It's a little less congested. Even during the festival, when it is very crowded, it's nowhere near as crazy as being in New York. So it's a blast. I look forward to it every year. I drove this year, which I think driving actually has finally cured me of my fear of flying because like the first year I went, I drove and it didn't seem bad. The second year I went, I flew and it was much shorter. And then this year I drove again and I just kept thinking about how much quicker it was to fly last year. And so I think...
Wait, so how long does it take to drive?
It takes a little over 8 hours. Which, I don't mind a long drive. I got an audiobook. I got the audiobook on the making of 2001: A Space Odyssey, and I was able to listen to the entire thing, both driving there and back, which was fine. But driving there wasn't bad, but man, that drive home, it was like it's like 7 o'clock at night and I was still on the road and I was like, all right, this is it. I have to, I'm over my fear of flying forever because this isn't worth it. So thank you, long drive to Toronto. You cured me of my fear of flying.
Well, only flying to that location.
Yeah, I mean, an hour flight, I can do that. Anything longer, I don't know. I'll see how that goes when the time comes.
Well, you can read all of Chris's film festival reviews on the site. We've talked about them previously on this podcast. And as your film festival experience has come to a close, someone's film festival experience is just about to begin. Jacob, tell us about it.
Yeah, I've been preparing for Fantastic Fest here in Austin, Texas, and if you've been reading the site or following me, you know that this is a festival I go to every single year. I think this is year 9 I've been to Fantastic Fest, and it's the largest genre film festival in the United States. It is just this incredible lineup of crazy movies from all over the world. The only issue is that this year is let's say another member of the Slash Film team is taking their vacation while I'm on Fantastic Fest, which means that I am having like daily panic attacks. Even though I know the team will be fine with me being only half present while I'm covering the film festival, but I'm doing the best I can to prepare and like send out emails and get contingency plans in place. Because as managing editor, for those of you who want to know how the sausage gets made on a movie website, my job is to hear ideas from the staff. Help shepherd forward ideas, take care of the schedule, edit posts, and just make sure the site is operating on a day-to-day basis. We have things to go up. And with a certain someone who shall not be named going out of the country on a vacation, it means that poor Brad has to essentially do my job plus his job with Peter's help for the days that I'm gone. So as I prepare for what's honestly my favorite week of the year, I also have to it's always on the edge of my brain that someone is making my job much harder, Ben.
Sorry.
No, I kid. It's gonna be great. We're just so many awesome movies playing this year, and just looking over the schedule today, I keep finding little things that are jumping out at me, like a movie about Laika, the Russian space dog, who in 1957 the Soviet Union launched into space, and famously Laika died in space because they couldn't get the dog back from space. But this is a Czech stop-motion animated musical about what happens when Laika actually goes into space and lands on an alien planet and makes friends there. So the fact that I get to see this movie is insane, and this is why I love this film festival. And I'm very, very excited about bring that and word of other really strange movies around the world to you, the readers and listeners. But beyond that, I went to a murder mystery party over the weekend. My sister and her husband throw these every few months, and if you haven't done these before, you get assigned a character, and it has full of little details about who you are, your motivations, what you want, and there's a setting. This time it was a Wild West saloon after a poker tournament.
Wait, are you doing this over like a friend's house? Oh,
yeah, my sister and her brother and her my brother-in-law, her husband, throw these at their house. Let's say maybe every 4 to 5 months or so.
Now, who constructs this setting and like storyline?
Oh, there's no setting. But you can find the storylines online. There's tons of them available. Search for murder mystery parties, and you just print out a bunch of sheets, and you hand out all the characters. And everybody gets a sheet saying, "Here's who you are. Here's how you should dress," and some people follow that, some people don't. I just wore a cowboy hat. I ignored everything else in my list of wardrobe recommendations. But then it tells you, hey, you need to go around this party, talk to this person, make sure they know this. If someone accuses you of this, deny it. And they give you a list of like protocols, essentially, that encourage you to go out into the party, mingle, and meet. And so the idea being that even though you're playing a character, you don't take it too seriously. The whole goal of the party is to be in a room full of other people with a list of character details that encourage you to go out and meet everybody. So I was playing this degenerate gambler. So my job was to not let myself not be found out as a cheater. So my instructions say things like, if you are accused of cheating, deny it. So with somebody else's paper said, you must go find Jack the gambler and accuse him of being a cheater. So when that person found me and said that, I had to like loudly deny, saying, how dare you, sir, accuse me of being a cheater. And at some point in the night, somebody is murdered, and then everybody else gets a second envelope with post-murder details to add more fuel to the fire. And one person's a murderer.
How is it determined who is the murderer?
Oh, it literally says at the bottom of their character sheet, at some point tonight you'll be murdered. And the party host goes to them, okay, time to murder you. And they put them down and they turn off all the lights, usually fire off a cap gun. Lights turn back on, the person's on the ground lying there dead. And the person who's dead takes on a new character, and it goes from there. And these are always fun. It depends on, like, some people take it really seriously. Like, I have a friend named Laura. She's 8 months pregnant. She still showed up. She was assigned the town sheriff, so she gave herself a big burly mustache, transformed her pregnant belly into a beer gut, and walked around like she was this really fat sheriff when she's a pregnant woman. And in fact, Laura and I have this tradition where we always try to inject nonsense into the games. Like, for example, a lot of people brought fake horses as props and tied them up by the front of the house. So at one point in the evening, I told Laura to go eulogize the person who was murdered, so she got everybody's attention. Well, I stole all the horses and hid them in another room, and then started talking about how there was a horse thief on the loose, and everybody thought the horse thief was part of the written game when it wasn't. So we started sowing chaos about a horse thief just to cause chaos, and more people started searching for the horse thief and trying to figure out who is the horse thief and solving the murder, even though it had nothing to do with the game. So that's how I play murder mystery parties, just by creating chaos. But yeah, they're fun, and if you want a party that's like half get together, half role playing game, just Google murder mystery party. There's so many of them out there, and they are fun if you get the right group together.
I've always wanted to do something like this, and I've looked into, like, they have those, like, what do you call them? Like, where you actually go, like, it's an event and you pay to go. But, like, I've looked into, like, all the reviews of that, and it seems to be, like, really cheesy and not what you're talking about. This sounds like the thing I want to experience.
Yeah, like, you should throw one, Peter. I mean, go online, find a theme that you like, invite the right people, and host it yourself. It'll be low rent because you're doing it yourself in your home, but that's part of the fun. Part of the fun is everybody brings their own little bits and pieces to the story, and you see how everybody else reacts in the environment.
I've been to one of these before, actually. My friend had, for his birthday party, a murder mystery party. That was, I think, the same site that offers all these stories, and it was a pirate-themed one, which is really fun. I was a tavern wench, if I remember. I can't remember what my role was, except to, like, I think, sow gossip or something like that. But it's a lot of fun. It's very low rent, but it's good with a really close-knit, really energetic group of friends.
Well, very cool. While you guys were doing that, Ben was at a concert that I was unable to attend. Ben, tell us about it.
Yeah, I went to Lost Live, which was Michael Giacchino performing or conducting the Hollywood Studio Symphony Orchestra at the Ford Theater here in Los Angeles this past Saturday. And it was basically just a run of a bunch of different songs that he composed for the TV show Lost that was on almost 14 years ago was when it premiered. So that's sort of like part of why they were doing this, is it quasi celebrating this 14th anniversary, which is actually, I think, coming up in a few days. It was amazing. I've actually seen 2 of these Lost Live concerts before. The first one was the first time that I really hung out with my wife, so that was kind of a cool thing. And then so I have a very personal stake in this show in particular, because it's sort of like what we bonded over early in our relationship. So it's, in addition to this music being some of the best music ever created for any property whatsoever, and having these, soaring emotions and stuff tied to it, it also has this extra level for me of my own personal marriage being tied into this. So it was a terrific experience. I actually ran into a listener. Her name was Monique. She came up and introduced herself and said that she recognized me from Slash Film. She read our stuff and liked it a lot, and she listens to the podcast all the time. So I wanted to give a quick shout out to Monique and thank her for coming up and saying hi. That was really cool.
She just recognized you out of the crowd?
Yeah, I was just taking pictures in the front of the stage, and she was right next to me and said, "Hey, I think I'm sorry to bother you, but I think you write for Slash Film, whatever." And I was like, "Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for saying hey." So that was very cool. That's one of the first times that I've been recognized in public for for Slash Film stuff. Hint, hint. Precursor to somebody else saying something very similar pretty soon. And then I guess I wrote up a big feature on the site today and actually put together some video of the concert and some of the highlights. Damon Lindelof and Carlton Cuse, the showrunners, were there, and they were answering questions from the crowd. And you can watch the video. It's very long. It's 25 minutes, but any hardcore Lost fan will probably find a lot to enjoy in there. One really final thing that I wanted to say about this that was really cool that they hadn't done previously was a lot of the cast came out and sort of like a surprise. Nobody knew that they were going to be there, but Josh Holloway and Emily DeRaven and Daniel Day Kim and a bunch of others came out, and they during the concert would actually read some scenes from the screenplays, from the scripts, from the episodes of the show. And they actually had Emily DeRaven reading we're talking about spoilers, so I guess spoilers for Lost. I think this was the end of season 3, but Charlie dies in that show, and Emily DeRaven's character Claire is Charlie's love interest. So they had her get up in front of everybody and read the Charlie's tragic death scene, and it was just completely heartbreaking. And I got that entire thing on camera, and that's in that video. So go check that out, because it is it's very moving, and the music is great. And Giacchino also debuted a piece of music from the Bad Times of the El Royale score, so that was pretty cool. I got that as a separate video, and that's in that piece at slashfilm.com as well.
Very cool. And you mentioned that someone else got recognized for being on this podcast. HT, tell us about it.
Hi, yeah. So I had the first person recognize me from podcasting, and it was a very weird experience that flustered me a little bit. It was nice, not weird, but it was just something I didn't expect. But I was at the Landmark Theater in Bethesda, Maryland, buying a ticket for Three Identical Strangers, which I talked about last week. And the ticket guy, the ticket cashier person, was selling me my ticket and said, "Oh, I thought I recognized you. I'm a fan." And I was like, "Oh, okay."
Wait, so did he see your name, and that's how
he saw my name? I think I think he recognized my face, because I only said one ticket to Three Identical Strangers, please. And then he basically saw my name and it confirmed his suspicions. And was like, "I'm a fan." First he said also Millennial Falcon, which is my podcast that I do for fun with 2 of my friends. And then he said about Slash Film, and I was like, "Oh, thank you very much." And it was very cool. So I was flustered, and then I ran away and didn't get his name. But I'm sorry, guy at Bethesda Landmark at ticketing. You were very nice.
I always find it interesting, especially with podcasts, how people recognize each other. I mean, I guess people follow people on social media, but I hear so many stories from the guys at Slash Filmcast, like Dave and Devendra, and they'll be out in public and someone will just recognize their voice from being on a train with them and be like, "Wait, are you Dave, that kind of thing. And it's just funny. But
this happened to me last year where I was at my local comic book store where they have a registry system where they ask for your names and keep track of your purchases in case you want to make returns. And a new employee asked my name. I told him, and he pauses and goes, Jacob Hall from Slash Film? So it does happen. It's happened a few times to me now, but usually at fests. But that was the first time in a non-film festival environment where somebody randomly recognized me.
See, I feel like Jacob Hall is a much more common name, but like if someone ran into HT, I think immediately they would be like, "You're from Slash Film," if they knew you're from Slash Film.
Maybe it's my hair. I do have purple hair now, so it somewhat matches my Twitter profile.
Yes. Well, we appreciate when people come up to us, or, I don't want to say we appreciate. Chris likes to run away from those kind of people, but.
Well, I will say when I was at TIFF, someone did actually recognize me. So someone who wasn't a critic. So it was fine. It was fine. I did not run away. I was like, oh, hello. And then I looked at my phone. So maybe I was a little bit rude about it, but yeah. So yeah.
I don't know. I appreciate it. So if you see us in public, come over, say hey, and tell us what you think of the stuff. It's, even if you hate it, or not if you hate it, because we don't do that in person. We only do that on Twitter. Okay, let's move on to what we've been reading. Ben, what have you been reading?
Yeah, so as Jacob indicated, I'm going to be leaving on Friday for a 2-week vacation to Iceland and Ireland. And one of the cities that I'm going to in Ireland is Dublin. And so I read James Joyce's Dubliners, which is a book of 15 short stories that was published in the early 1900s. And I think I had read maybe one James Joyce book before. I don't even remember what it was. It was in high school. It was one of those that I was sort of forced to read. But this one I decided to read, of my own volition, because I was going to this foreign country in this city that I'd never been to before, and I had heard that this book was sort of and my wife actually bought it, and she's getting ready to read it. She's probably going to read it on the plane as we're flying over there. But this book is very evocative of this sort of like naturalistic I guess descriptions of the area, and it's very like not much actually happens in these short stories. They're just sort of people living in Dublin at this time in the the early 1900s. So I don't know if I would recommend it really for like the story or the narrative or anything, because it doesn't really have one. It's just sort of like a bunch of unconnected short stories collected together. But it overall, it sort of paints this picture of the city and of these the working class at the time and what these people's lives were like and what they were doing. And it's very specific with its locations and imagery and stuff. So I feel like I got a lot out of it in that regard, getting ready to go to the city. Like I'll probably recognize certain landmarks and stuff from the book that I may not have otherwise. So I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Dubliners, which it's very, very short. It's only like 150 pages or something. So if anybody wants to fly through it, it probably won't take you too long to read. But and some of those short stories, man, are pretty rough, but other ones are good. I mean, it was a very mixed bag. It's sort of like an anthology, like a ABC's or like the VHS movies or something, where there's a movie where there's a bunch of different shorts that sort of comprise the whole thing. So obviously some are better than others, but yeah, that's James Joyce's Dubliners.
I'm interested to hear, after you get back from this vacation, how much all these things, like these books, these movies, actually, paid off in some way for your actual trip.
I don't know if it's like, I'm basically just doing it to sort of get in the mood and like extend my vacation a little bit, on the front end of things and sort of make it feel like I'm there already. So I'm not sure how, it'll be interesting when I get back. Maybe I'll try to look at everything through that lens, and if anything in particular stands out. But I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit.
Yeah. I haven't been reading anything, but I did add this to the list of things I've been reading because I have been listening to this podcast, Inside Jaws. Have any of you listened to this yet?
I know there was an Inside Jaws podcast.
heard of it, but never listened to it.
Yeah, it's made by the company Wondery. They did Inside Psycho and Inside the Exorcist, both of which I have not heard. But basically, I've only listened to a few episodes of this, and it was on, we were driving a far distance, so we needed something to listen to. And it's kind of done in the same way as that other podcast that I think you mentioned, Ben, a while back about Hollywood, where
the Secret Histories of Hollywood.
Yeah, it's presented kind of like a radio play in a way, where there's sound effects and you're going through the experience of young Steven Spielberg leading up to making Jaws, and I'm sure it gets into Jaws, but the first few episodes are kind of like a Cliff Notes version of the Steven Spielberg origin story. I think at times it's a little bit more obvious, especially for people like us that kind of know these moments in Steven Spielberg's life, and it's kind of expounding on them in a really obvious way. Like, I don't think things probably happened in the way, because he's like dramatizing, moments from, like Spielberg breaking onto the Universal Studios backlot, for instance. And I doubt things actually happened anywhere like the way it's presented here, but it's an enjoyable listen. And I would, if you like podcasts, you're listening to this podcast, you might want to check it out. It's called Inside Jaws. And, let's move on to what we've been watching. Let's start first with Chris. Chris, you saw a bunch of stuff at Toronto, but you talked about most of it here. Tell us about some stuff that you did not talk about yet.
One film I did not talk about because I saw it after I did the podcast on TIFF was Alfonso Cuarón's Roma, which is incredible. This film really blew me away. I am by no means a Netflix hater, and in fact, I'd rather, 9 times out of 10, I'd rather just stay home and watch stuff on my TV. But it's a little upsetting that this is technically a Netflix movie, because this demands to be seen on the biggest screen possible. It's gorgeous to look at. There was this weird trend I noticed this year at TIFF where a lot of the films were shot in either extreme close-up or really boring, like medium shots, which is like, from the waist up on people. And this whole movie is shot in this like gorgeous, almost like every shot is like a tableau. It's like this gorgeous visual where Cuarón uses every single inch of the frame to paint this picture he's telling. And it's a phenomenal film. It's a little slow, and it was so slow that when it started out, I was a little worried. I was like, is this gonna, is the whole movie gonna be like this? But eventually it settles into what it's trying to do, and it gets really emotional and really powerful. And like the entire row of people I was sitting with by the end, including me, where we're just like sobbing uncontrollably when this movie ends. So it is getting a limited theatrical release when it comes out, I think, in November. So if it ends up playing at a theater near you, I really recommend trying to see this in theaters, because it's just stunning to look at. But if not, even if you end up seeing it, only on Netflix, it's still gonna be good. It's not gonna be less of a good movie that way.
And now that you're home, did you get to watch anything else?
I did. I finally watched Ocean's 8, which I just did not get to see in theaters, and it's fine. The cast is great. It's a fun movie. It's very entertaining, but it really wastes, I'd say, like 90% of that cast. As great as they are, they don't really have a lot to do. Like Mindy Kaling has almost nothing to do in the movie. Even Cate Blanchett, who was all over the marketing, really doesn't have much to do in the movie. So that was a little disappointing. I wish someone would make another movie with this cast and give them all a lot more to do. That said, Anne Hathaway is fantastic. She's probably like the best part of the movie. She's very funny. And so, yeah, I enjoyed it, but it's disposable. It's a forgettable film. Like, I doubt I'm ever going to watch it again. But, for what it is, it's pretty good.
Yeah, I agree with that assessment. Let me talk about a lot of the stuff that I've been watching lately. I mentioned in the past that I'm a big fan of Better Call Saul, and, I don't bring it up every week because I'm watching it every week, but, I did want to bring it up this week because, a recent episode was directed by Andrew Stanton of Pixar fame, and he's been doing a bunch of TV recently. He did some episodes of Stranger Things, and he did an episode of this, and I think he's doing some other stuff, and, I'm loving the fact that, we're getting, to see more of Andrew Stanton's work, on a more, often basis than, every 5 years, the typical development cycle of a Pixar film. And he's a good director, and he's a good TV director. The other thing I wanted to say about Better Call Saul, and I guess this is a very minor spoiler, is one of the things I love about this show is this season, a lot of what this season is about is them, or one of the subplots is them explaining how this underground lab that is introduced in Breaking Bad came to be. And literally, this is something that they could have just, explained in one line of dialogue. It could have been something that, they could have just explained it was something, it was already there. But it's kind of like this plot hole that they are milking in excruciatingly fun detail. It is they don't need to do this, but they're coming out with a completely logical explanation of how this thing came to be in a way that I don't think was necessary, and it's just so enjoyable. Chris, are you caught up on Better Call Saul?
I am, yeah. And I agree. It is amusing that they're taking so much time to develop this lab, but I'm also enjoying it a lot.
Yeah, it's just how the logistics of it, how everything's explained. It's just a lot of fun. I also got to see an early screening of Jonah Hill's directorial debut, Mid90s, I guess it's called. I think it's one of my favorite movies of this year so far, guys. It's a coming of age movie in the vein of a Richard Linklater film, so it's very short on plot and more on these characters and the experience of it. Not to say that it's it's not like Slacker where it lacks any plot, but it's more like Boyhood, if that gives you an idea. And it's a very impressive directorial debut. It feels so authentic and relatable to me. I was never a skateboarder. I didn't grow up with parties and drugs and drinking and all that. But everything in this movie is so insanely relatable. Everybody, I think, at one point in their life found their family of friends. And this movie is kind of about that, and it's, I'm not sure if I've mentioned it on this podcast, but before I got into writing about movies, I wanted to make movies, and I made this film called Escaping Reality, a feature film, and it was never released. I wrote about it on slashfilm.com. I'll link it in the show notes, but it was a coming of age drama. It ended up really being a horrible movie. But I think everything I wanted to say in that horrible movie, I think Jonah Hill says in this film in a more profound way than I could have ever have done. It's just such a great, I don't know, it's such a great movie, and it takes place in the 90s, and I think it kind of nails all the kind of touchstones of that era, just all the clothes and all the music and everything. And Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross score is good, understated though. It has a lot of soundtrack to it. There's a lot of moments of silence, but it's very enjoyable. And yeah, so I really recommend go see Mid90s. It is presented in that 4:3 aspect ratio, which I know when it started, some people in the crowd were like, what's going on here? It's kind of strange to see that on the big screen nowadays. But yeah, I've also been watching, I started, last week we talked about, Ben brought up the fact that I go to IMDb to look for TV shows to watch, to find, in peak television, find some of the stuff that rises to the top to check out. And here's one of the times that kind of did me wrong. in a way. I found this show called The Sinner. Okay, so we start watching this show called The Sinner, and it some of the episodes are directed by Antonio Campos, who is the guy Campos, who did Simon Killer and Christine. It's very well directed. It's a really good show. I guess the show could what I was watching, what happens, not to give too much away, what happens in the first 5 minutes of the show is a young kid, like an 11-year-old kid, kills his mother and father while they're on a trip going to Niagara Falls. He poisons them and kills them. The show stars Bill Pullman as a detective, and it's them investigating not necessarily who did it, because who did it is answered in the first 5 minutes. It's answering why it happened, and there's a lot of twists and turns and in true kind of like true crime fashion. So if you like any of those kind of true crime kind of shows, I highly recommend this. But a few episodes in, we kind of came to the realization that we were watching season 2 of the show called The Sinner, and not season 1. Luckily, this show is an anthology series, and you don't really need to see season 1 to get season 2. But that main character of Bill Pullman is a detective in season 1, investigating a entirely different case. I think there's some references and stuff to some stuff that happens in season 1, but so far it has not come into a big play, and I've done some searching, and they're basically like, yeah, it's its own kind of complete story. So, Chris, have you been watching this?
I saw the first season. I have not watched the second season yet. And I like the first season. The first few episodes are better than the last few. It sort of runs out of steam, but I do like the idea of the show where it's not a who done it, it's a why done it, where you instantly know what happened and you have to figure out why it happened. So I like that setup.
Yeah, and I don't know. I'm really hooked on this. I think we started watching this at like 10 o'clock at night, and we were, still watching episodes at 1 a.m. We were like, we got to go to bed. It's a very binge-worthy show. It's a show on USA Network, which I think, still kind of has a stigma to it of like people don't like consider it good television, even though it has Mr. Robot and Suits and, some good shows like The Sinner. But I highly recommend it. You can watch it on USA Network on demand. And I don't know. I'm really enjoying it. Maybe it goes downhill, but it seems like, at least from my investigating, the reviews for season 2 are much higher than season 1. So Chris, you might want to check it out. But Jacob, what have you been watching?
I watched my favorite movie of the year last night, and if anything tops it, I'm in for a great wave of joy. And that movie is Mandy, the new film by director Panos Cosmatos. I saw his first film, Beyond the Black and Rainbow, at Fantastic Fest years and years ago, and this film feels like an extension on what he was building there, but it's so much more. And it feels like it's a movie that's a lot of people, I think, are prepared to watch it ironically, because it's Nicolas Cage, modern day Nicolas Cage, in an over-the-top revenge story. But this is a movie that is so hard to explain, because I can tell you the entire plot right now from beginning to end, and it would not change how you would feel watching this movie and actually experiencing it. And I don't think you even watch it as much as the movie happens to you. It is just this visceral, odd, nightmarish thing that's happening and surrounding you and getting in under your skin and through your brain. And the basic gist of the movie is Nicolas Cage plays this lumberjack in 1983, living with Mandy, the love of his life. They live out in the woods in this secluded house, and Mandy's targeted by this cult leader and this gang of hellish bikers. And what ends up happening to her leads Nicolas Cage's character, Red Miller, to go on a path of revenge. And even though, if I lay out the plot of how he gets revenge or how he seeks revenge, or it's not like I'm describing a pretty standard movie, but this is a film that does not take place in our world. There are no highways. There's very little modern technology. There's no one ever calls the police when something goes wrong. This is essentially, it feels almost post-apocalyptic. It feels like it's a fantasy world. It feels like it's just alternate alternate realm. It's supposed to be a dream state, this really bad nightmare where all the conveniences of modern life, all the systems that exist to support you and keep your life comfortable don't exist. And so once you acknowledge this movie does not take place in the real world, it takes place in this fantasia of horror and fantasy and whatever else Cosmatos wants to throw at you, you kind of get on its vibe. And it takes an hour to get going. It's a 2-hour movie, and the first hour is very slow by design. It's lulling you in. It's taking its sweet-ass time to get you in the right mood. It's using color and sound and music to hypnotize you and bring you into the movie's wavelength. And then the second half happens where Nicolas Cage, with barely any dialogue, delivering maybe my favorite Cage performance of all time. In the past, I've written about how the John Wick movies feel like they were designed to take a mental list of here's what Keanu Reeves does well. Let's build a character in a movie that plays to all of his strengths and none of his weaknesses. Mandy feels built from the ground up to say Nicolas Cage is a very special actor who's often misused. Let's build a character in a movie that will showcase everything we love on Nicolas Cage and let him use all the things he likes to do in ways that are powerful and moving. There's a one-take scene in this movie where his character is in the bathroom and grabs a bottle of alcohol and has a freak out. And some people, I think the audience, started chuckling at first. So here's Nicolas Cage freak out. Here's this wacky moment with Nicolas Cage. And you start realizing after the scene goes on and on and on, this is not funny. It's Nicolas Cage channeling such raw, humiliating emotions, like emotions that most actors would be ashamed to dredge up on camera, and he's spilling them out in front of you. And this is before you get the chainsaw fights, and before you get to like the drugged out, trippy acid sequences, before you get to these hellish landscapes where characters descend into what appears to be hell on earth to do battle in landscapes that look from heavy metal rock album covers. This movie has seeped into my brain in a big way. I wrote a big article about Mary Poppins Returns this morning. I kept on thinking, man, I should watch Mandy again while I was writing about Mary Poppins. I didn't want to write about Mary Poppins. I wanted to watch Mandy. I have not felt this way about a movie since Kill List, Ben Wheatley's second film. And I am overwhelmed with like joy and terror at this movie's mere existence. I am thrilled by Mandy.
Well, very cool. Even more so than you saying this is your favorite movie of the year, you saying that this is Nicolas Cage's best performance ever has me excited to see this.
Yeah, well, I also, I guess to move into something that's not quite as good, I also saw The Predator, and it's fine. It's I feel like Shane Black is using The Predator as an excuse to make a splatter comedy full of his typical snappy dialogue. But I agree with the rest of the Slash Film crew that the ending doesn't work. It's fun until it's not. The ending really falls apart. The last half hour is bad. I think Sterling K. Brown is pretty great in it. I wish he had more to do. But it's a missed opportunity, albeit one that I had a lot of fun with for the first maybe 80 minutes or so. I also saw Hackers. Has anyone else here seen Hackers recently?
I saw it like a year ago with my girlfriend who had never seen it. Yeah.
Speaking of mid-90s, Peter, is this the most 90s movie ever made? It has so much skateboarding and so much bad slang and so much terrible fashion and
Penn Jillette as a IT guy.
Yes. And people misunderstanding computers and how computers work on the most basic fundamental levels. It is amazing. It's streaming on Amazon Prime, and I want to say it's a bad movie, but it's one that's so of its time and such a bizarre time capsule miracle that I recommend checking it out. And finally, because I've been going on for way too long, I watched Ultimate Beastmaster Season 3, or the first half of it. And I talked about the show on the podcast before. It's a physical stunt course show on Netflix, pretty much American Ninja Warrior, but it was an international cast from different countries. It's on Netflix. And this year they changed up the format. The course has changed a lot. They've changed the way they do the finals. They've changed the way the rules operate. They've changed the lineup of countries. I'm not so sure how I feel about the lineup of all the rules and all the changes. I have nits to pick with that. But this is the Great British Baking Show of athletic competition series, because it's so warm-hearted. Everybody's having such a good time. Everybody's happy to be there. The countries are all supporting each other, all cheering for each other. It's a show without a negative bone in its body. And even when people are winning and losing and egging each other on in the right ways and the wrong ways, you get the sense that there's this compassion for everybody here. Everybody on this show, the contestants and the commentators, each from all different countries, all seem to be ecstatic when somebody else wins, sour when somebody else loses, and they have each other's backs, and it's the ultimate feel-good show for meatheads. And so a Great British Baking Show is always a little bit too light and fluffy for you, but you want that same warm feeling, this is definitely a show worth checking out.
Very cool, and that's on Netflix right now. HT, what have you been watching?
So I saw A Simple Favor, the mystery suspense film starring Blake Lively and Anna Kendrick, and it's directed by Paul Feig in his attempt to break serious. And I realized about 20 minutes into the film that this is not a serious film at all. It's actually basically a Paul Feig comedy, and very much has this weird satirical undertone to it, despite being a more darker film than we're used to seeing from Paul Feig. It's kind of a weird movie. I didn't really know what to expect of it when I was going in, except that it was kind of meant to be a Gone Girl knockoff in the vein of Girl on the Train, and it definitely succeeded at being Gone Girl but more fun, and almost felt like a self-aware ode to Lifetime movies. So I've watched a lot of Lifetime movies in my life, just often in the background, and I find them really fun and silly and trashy. And A Simple Favor feels like an elevated Lifetime movie in a sense. It's trashy, but it knows it's trashy. And while it feels like a sort of hodgepodge of all these influences, it also doesn't really care. It's having fun with it, essentially. You will have fun if you watch this movie, especially if you see it while drinking a 50-foot glass of wine. So it definitely was like a very strange movie, but I had so much fun with it that you don't really care. It has a lot of twists and turns. And Blake Lively is great in it, actually. It's, I think, a really great emergence of Blake Lively as a character actress, which it sounds weird to say, but she is really... She does a lot of things that you don't really expect of her, and she's I think we kind of saw hints of that when she started in The Shallows 2 years ago or last year, and here she gets to really play at being a sociopathic beauty, which is really interesting.
You know, I know everything you're saying in a positive way, but I'm just listening to it, and it all sounds negative to me.
It's fun. I mean, honestly, it does sound weird because, like, I know Lifetime movies aren't a thing for everyone. It's a certain brand of camp that I think you have to enjoy. It's definitely not a movie for everyone, but it's a movie that if you have like a degree of just like expectations for what this movie will be, then I think you will enjoy it.
Well, cool. What else have you been watching?
I'm also another movie which is a little bit on the campy side. I watched Netflix's live action adaptation of Bleach, which is an anime series, which was one of my favorites when I was really into anime back in the mid 2000s. And so Bleach follows this ordinary high school kid who has the ability to see ghosts and spirits. And he's kind of delinquent. He has orange hair, which he dyes in this movie. And one day he gets attacked by this giant monster called a Hollow. And he sees this Reaper, a Shinigami, who is a woman in a kimono and has this long samurai sword trying to defeat this monster. And she gets mortally injured. And she basically gives him her powers, and he becomes a Soul Reaper. And that's basically the premise for it. The movie takes a much simpler approach to this really grandiose, really complex mythology of the anime. And I think it was a really smart thing to do because it has first, a lot of the stories aren't really intended to be adapted to live action. I think Bleach was actually kind of a perfect adaptation for a live action film because it's a relatively simple story. It's a kind of grand fantasy thrust onto this ordinary guy, and it also knows exactly what it is. It has its great campy moments, and it has these ridiculous fight scenes that almost border on wuxia at some point, and it has fun with it, and it also pares down the story into a much more simpler, much more personal story, and it works really well instead of trying to tackle the really dense mythology of the anime series in general. So I had a great time watching this. It was fun. way to revisit this anime series that I haven't watched in a long time, but I was a big fan of it when it came out. But is it still going? I don't think it's still going. I think it ended. But it was one of those anime series that, like, along the lines of Naruto and Sailor Moon, that was hugely popular and went on for way too long and had a million filler arcs, but had a really interesting mythology that I don't think you see a lot in a lot of anime.
And it seems like Netflix is trying to do a lot of animated adaptations, so I'm curious how this is going to pan out for them. But you also started another Netflix TV series.
Yeah. I stayed in a lot this weekend, and I watched the first episode of American Vandal Season 2. I didn't get to do the whole binge yet, but I really enjoyed Season 1. I think we've talked about this before. It's a great series that surprisingly gets deep into the high school experience and has a surprisingly authentic depiction of the social pressures that come with growing up as a high school student, despite being an elaborate dick joke, or in Season 2's case, an elaborate poop joke. And this is kind of funny to me because I really hate scatological humor. I can't stand, it's just like a personal thing. I hate poop in general. I get very grossed out at just the sight of poop. So I was very nervous about starting this episode and this season. And I did have to watch through my fingers a little bit, just because I get very, I don't want to say triggered, but it affects me a little more than some people, I think. But it's a really great start, and I'm excited to see where Season 2 takes us.
Ben, you also started watching Season 2.
I did, yeah. I think I'm 4 episodes in at this point, and I think there's only 8 episodes total in Season 2. And I am really digging it so far. It's not as good as Season 1, I think, although the premiere episode is especially good. But I think overall, I mean, it's so hard to talk about the show being halfway through when it's so short like this, because, you know, if the last 4 episodes are amazing, then it's going to raise my estimation of the season by a tremendous amount. So I guess I'll just say that I started it, and if you enjoyed the first season, you're probably going to enjoy at least huge chunks of the second season from what I've seen so far. So maybe I'll come back on in a few weeks and talk about finishing it up and seeing how we go from there.
And what else have you been watching?
And then one last thing is I rewatched Star Wars The Force Awakens. It was on TNT last night. And hot take, guys, that movie is pretty good. I actually love The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. I don't know. It seems like there are all these camps online now where you have to be one or the other. But both of these movies are really, really good. And The Force Awakens, I mean, especially, you know, covering it or watching it from the way that we've covered it on the site and knowing all of the production problems that it had and like the deadlines that it had and how J.J. Abrams wanted a little bit more time, but Bob Iger really wanted to keep the Christmas release date and all that stuff. Like, you know, watching the movie through the lens of the restrictions that the filmmakers were under makes it even more impressive, because it's just a great movie on its own, and the fact that they had to do it all under such tremendous pressure really makes it even better in my view. I watched this because the scene at the end at Octo, the planet that Luke is on at the very end of the movie, is filmed at Skellig Michael, which is this island that's off the coast of Ireland, and I'm hoping, if the weather permits, that my wife and I are going to be able to actually go and visit there when we go on our trip. So I'm planning on rewatching The Last Jedi right before we leave as well, just to sort of get back into that geographical mindset, and maybe see if I can bring my video camera out there, maybe a drone or something, and get some video and hopefully get a whole Jedi experience if it's not raining too bad, because you have to take a boat from the mainland to actually get out there. So yeah, we'll see how that goes.
Do they let you do a drone out there?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I know they let people bring a ton of cameras and stuff, so I know I can get some video, but I'm not sure about the drone. I'm gonna like scurry it away in a backpack and maybe see if I can get away with it. See if I can sneak some drone shots while I'm out there.
Are you and Amy gonna recreate scenes or picture or like images from the last
I mean, maybe, I don't know. I've seen, like, if you go on Instagram and just look at the hashtags, there are people out there doing like hardcore cosplay stuff, and that's not really my thing. I've never really gotten into that. that world as much as, there are definitely people who are really great at it. So I'm sure all of the greatness has already been captured there. So it would be silly to even try. But maybe we'll we'll reenact some of the easier moments that don't require like full length costumes or anything. I don't know.
Well, cool. Brad, what have you been watching?
Oh yeah, I'm on this podcast too.
Yes.
I forgot. That's crazy. I've seen a lot of stuff actually. So one thing that I watched, unfortunately, was the Netflix original movie Sierra Burgess is a Loser. If you haven't heard of this movie, it stars Barb from Stranger Things, and it's painted to be this, kind of quirky underdog coming of age teen romance kind of thing where it's the character is supposed to be this girl who's not really considered to be all that attractive, and she's bullied and has trouble with boys and that kind of thing. And then she, by happenstance, she ends up being texted by this boy that she finds is cute, which also happens to be Noah Centineo from To All the Boys I've Loved Before. And so he's texting her, and she texts him, but she realizes that he thinks she's somebody else, but she continues to pretend to be this girl who is one of the girls who bullies her. And so she basically just starts catfishing him and thinks that he's her, and you're supposed to like be okay with this, and it's supposed to be charming and cool, but it makes her seem like a sociopath. It seems like its heart was like the people who made this movie, like their heart was in the right place, but they didn't realize how weird and unsettling some of this stuff is. Because the movie was there's moments in this movie that are just infuriating, and like it makes me hate the character, and it was extremely frustrating, and I was so upset with how this movie turned out.
And that was on Netflix, right?
Yeah, it's on Netflix.
So don't watch it on Netflix.
I wouldn't recommend watching it. It's just it's so frustrating. But I also saw The Nun, which was fine for what it was. Funnily enough, like I found myself thinking that this was almost kind of like a gothic horror superhero movie of sorts because of how Taissa Farmiga's character operates, and especially the ending. I won't spoil what happens, but like the final like showdown, I guess you could say, really doesn't feel too far removed from the kind of showdown you see in superhero movies between the antagonist and the protagonist. And like when you see the movie, or if you have already, that you know what I'm talking about, and it didn't really feel as much like a horror movie as I wanted. It has a lot of cheap jump scares, and I think it definitely it's done a disservice by not being the one like thing that's quote unquote based on a true story. It feels like far too much is fabricated, and sometimes it just feels goofy in a way. I don't know. I was disappointed. I didn't hate it, but it doesn't measure up to the rest of the movies in the Conjuring universe. I know Jacob adored this movie, and like I think the ambiance is there, and like Corin Hardy knows how to set a story up and like give it style, but the movie itself and how the horror unfolds was just really disappointing to me.
Well, all I'll say is that the final moments, the final moment between the nun and Taissa Farmiga will be a moment I argue for when we make our best moments of the year list at the very end of the year. Because it's totally crazy, and I love it.
Oh boy. I finally got around to seeing Black Klansman. I've just been dragging my feet on seeing that one, so I'm late to the party, but it is fantastic and infuriating all at once. John David Washington is an incredible actor. There's times when he sounds and acts just like his father, Denzel. It's almost odd, and sometimes you feel like you're watching young Denzel. But he does have sort of a different swagger about him. But sometimes, when he puts on the attitude and things, you can tell he's Denzel's son. But he was great in it. Adam Driver's fantastic. Topher Grace was, good as David Duke too, which you would expect to be this kind of over-the-top, ridiculous performance. But I think that it's the fact that he's so reserved and calm and casual about his grotesque racism that makes it that much more horrifying and unsettling to see in this movie. But yeah, it's so good. Definitely the best thing Spike Lee has done in years. And yeah, if you haven't seen it and it's playing near you, you should go out of your way to see it.
And you also saw The Predator. I know we talked about this yesterday or Friday on the podcast. So I'm not sure. Do you have anything more to say about the movie?
No, we don't have to dive into. Yeah, I would go listen to that episode because we talk about it much more there, and you can get my thoughts. I think I liked it more than pretty much everybody else on this podcast. I kind of just let myself get lost in the stupidity of it all. But you can hear about that on the previous episode. And then on the TV side of things, I finally finished the first season of The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel on Amazon. I started that and talked about that on here a while back, and it just took me forever to get through the show. Not because I didn't like it, but just because I would forget about it. I would get caught up on watching something else, and so I finally finished it. It's a fantastic show. It's probably one of my more favorite recent shows, just because I love the lead character so much. She's fantastic, and for me as a comedy nerd, I love that it's set in the world of stand-up comedy decades ago, when things were different, and it's just a very well done piece centered around this character. I'm really excited to see what they do in the second season, especially because a friend of mine apparently has a recurring role in a few of the episodes. So I'm excited to see him on screen in a show that I actually watch.
No, after I saw the first episode of that, I think I even texted you or whatever. I was like, Brad, you're going to like this show. This is your show.
Yeah, no, it's right up my alley, and I hope season 2 arrives sooner than later. I think it's probably will be November or December that it debuts. And then I had this sitting on my DVR forever, and I finally started watching it while I was working and just had it on the background. It's AMC's Visionaries, James Cameron's story of science fiction, where it's just him talking to various iconic filmmakers and actors who have been a part of some of the biggest and most successful sci-fi films and TV shows of all time, and just talking about the various genres and subsects of sci-fi, from time travel to artificial intelligence and space travel and monsters and all that stuff. And it's pretty basic stuff for people like us. There weren't a lot of revelatory things to be noted. There even are some of us in there, not us personally, but people we know, like Amy Nicholson and Matt Singer are on the show as talking heads, which is kind of cool. But yeah, it's a breezy, easy watch. If you're a sci-fi fan, you probably won't get tons out of it, but it is cool. Seeing James Cameron talk to Christopher Nolan and Guillermo del Toro and Steven Spielberg and George Lucas and all of them, and kind of getting their perspective on stuff. And yeah, so if you get a chance to watch it, it's a pretty cool series. And there's also a companion book that you can buy as well, which I'm thinking about getting.
See, I feel like I don't have interest in the show, but I would much if they've released a DVD with just the uncut conversations between him and Guillermo and him and Nolan and stuff like that. I feel like I would want to watch that.
Yeah, that's actually on a similar note. I always wish that they would release the uncut conversations from inside the actor studio, because those conversations are always 2 to 3 hours long, and they cut them down to hour-long episodes. And I've always wanted to see the full-length talks from that show.
They should do that. Okay, let's move on to what we've been eating. I'll go pretty quickly. While I was at Universal City Walk going to Halloween Horror Nights, I ate at Vivo Italian Kitchen, which is a new Italian place in Universal City Walk. City Walk in Hollywood doesn't really have that many great food places. It's a very touristy place. This is the first this is the first place I would give a really good rating on Yelp for. It's very good Italian food. It's not exceptional, but it's better than the rest of the touristy crap that you can find at Universal City Walk. The City Walk in Orlando is, bigger and better than the City Walk in Hollywood. And I am excited that my favorite Mexican place there is actually going to be, while I was walking through City Walk in Hollywood, it looks like they're building it here, and they're also building whatever the place is called, but it's the Willy Wonka chocolate factory here. So it seems like we're getting the best of what they had years ago over in Orlando. It's just taking a couple of years. And Also, very briefly, I'm on my diet. I'm not losing weight as fast as I would like. I'm considering going back on the keto diet, which I had lost 40 pounds last year on, and I'm kind of taking baby steps towards that. I think I'm going to start next week, and I'll talk about that on the podcast, in the future. Brad, what have you been eating?
Well, I was able to get my hands on some new snacks, of course. And so one of the things that I found when I stopped at a 7-Eleven to get some gas was a new exclusive flavor of Pringles that you can only get at 7-Eleven. And funnily enough, they are 7-layer dip Pringles. They are absolutely fantastic. They have just the right amount of spice to them, and they honestly have somehow captured the flavor of 7-layer dip and put it into a single chip. And had some actual 7-layer dip near me, I probably would have dipped them into it just to see what that would have been like, if it would have been like double the 7-layer dip, if there would have been a noticeable difference. But they're really good as far as the unique Pringle flavors that I found. They're probably one of the better ones. And if you can spot them at a 7-Eleven, you should give them a shot because they're pretty good. And then also, since it's September, all the Halloween candy is starting to pour out into stores, and there's not much as that I can tell as far as anything new, except I did find these new pull and peel Twizzlers, at least as far as I know they're new, and they're packaged for individual trick or treat consumption, but it's black cherry and orange pull and peel, which I think pull and peel Twizzlers are infinitely better than regular Twizzlers. The ones that are my favorites are usually the watermelon pull and peel, but these are pretty good though. I wasn't expecting black cherry to mix so well with orange. I felt it was probably like more of an aesthetic choice since it's orange and black, and it looks how like Halloween colors. But the two flavors together are actually pretty good. And as far as pull and peel Twizzlers go, it's one of the better flavor options in my opinion.
On our car ride to Comic-Con, I learned that you once worked in a licorice candy factory.
That's true. One of the summers between my years in college, I went back home and I got a job working at American Licorice, which is the company that makes Red Vines and Sour Punch straws. There's actually they have a factory location in my town. And since it was just a summerly hourly job, and so we were doing stuff like packing licorice straws into the big bags of the individually packaged straws, putting them into boxes. We had to put like some of the bigger like licorice sticks into like these plastic jars. Some of it was like watching the assembly line and making sure things didn't get caught up, and like kind of like looking out for like they have in the system like it cuts the Sour Punch straws into different segments, and it like automatically puts them in the packaging, and sometimes it would like get caught up or like it wouldn't get cut properly, and you have to pull those off the assembly line and keep it going. So it was very much a just one of those filler jobs, but it got me money over the summer so that I could go back to school and have some extra cash. But I always came home smelling like sweet sugar, and it made me hate licorice for the longest time.
Okay, let's move on to what we've been playing, because I know we're going a little bit long here. Jacob, what have you been playing?
Well, I'm here with my regular Dead Cells update, which I've talked about the past few times I've been on the show. I finally beat Dead Cells, and I thought, okay, I can go play other things now. But beating Dead Cells unlocks a new mode in Dead Cells, so now I'm playing Dead Cells again. On the tabletop, I played a game of Cash and Guns, which is a game that I would recommend to just about anybody listening to this, especially if you're a movie fan. It's a very fast, very easy, very simple, casual board game where everybody plays crooks, trying to split up a bunch of loot following a heist. And the game literally comes with a bunch of props.
It's basically Tarantino, the board game.
Yeah, and the game comes with a bunch of foam guns, and the chief mechanic of the game is that you either choose to load your gun or not load it, and on the count of three, y'all point them at people around the table for a standoff and try to get people to back down and not get loot, or try to act like you have your gun loaded or you don't have your gun loaded. And it's all about bluffing, all about choosing to load your gun and shoot the person at the right time to make sure they don't get what they want in the loot pile. It is incredibly fun. I've played it many times. My copy's getting worn. I need to buy a new one at this point. I feel like it's been used so often. But if you're a movie fan and you're familiar with the iconography of the games playing with, there's no way you can't have fun with this. I mean, it can be also as clean or as filthy as you want. I played it with families and kids, but I also played it with adults who break out the Tarantino language whenever they play with these foam guns. Cash and Guns is really terrific, and if that sounds like fun, and it should because you're a human being and you like good things, you should play it.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I played a game called Seven Continent again. I think I talked about this on a previous podcast, but it's a open world exploration game. I highly recommend it. I think it might only be available on Kickstarter, and that Kickstarter's gone. So this bit of the podcast helps nobody unless you already own it or know someone who owns it. But if you do, go play it. It's a lot of fun. Brad, what have you been playing or not been playing?
Honestly, it's a problem with what I'm not been playing because I keep seeing everybody talking about the damn new Spider-Man game, and it's driving me crazy because all they want to do is play it, but I don't have a PlayStation 4 yet. I'm gonna buy one next month. I couldn't afford to drop $400 on a PS4 Pro this month. But seriously, I swear to God, I'm buying a PlayStation 4 next month, and for an entire weekend, I'm just gonna sit and play that game because I keep seeing cool screenshots. I keep seeing videos of people talking about it and doing cool stuff on the streets in New York, and I can't stand it. I need to play this game. I need to have it, so I'm gonna buy it next month, and I'm gonna just play it and enjoy it because I can't take it anymore. I can't take it.
Hey Brad, you should buy Dead Cells. You don't need any other video games ever again.
I mean, I might. You've talked about it so much that it's actually intrigued me, so I might do that.
I'm not a gamer at all. I have no interest in modern video games, and seeing people talk about the Spider-Man game and watching videos makes me almost want to go out and buy it. So I
just want to buy it so I can thumbs up at random people on the streets.
I want to buy it. I want to buy all the copies Brad can get, so you can't get it.
No.
Okay, that brings us to the end of today's Slash Film Daily. You can find this podcast published every weekday on iTunes, Google Play, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps, as well as slashfilm.com. Please send us your feedback, questions, comments, concerns to us at peter@slashfilm.com. We are looking for questions for the mailbag, so if you have an interesting question you'd like to see us answer, send it to us at peter@slashfilm.com, and we should be getting to it this week at some point. Please go rate and review this podcast on iTunes. Tell your friends, spread the word, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Hey Peter, keep recording because I have a book in my hands.
I'm not even sure if people like this segment or not, but I'm gonna go with it. Okay,
it's for us. It's for us.
It's just for us.
I've opened the book to a random page. Who wants to go first? Who wants the great truth? Hey, HT, you're an expert at handing out bologna disguised as food for thought.
Oh my God.
Hey Ben, you're a human kite. You got where you are with wind and pull.
Okay, all right.
Hey Brad, you started out your life as an unwanted child. Now you're wanted in 10 states.
Ha!
Peter, when you lay your cards out on the table, it's a good idea for us to count them.
Because you're a cheater.
I see.
Chris,
I thought that had to do with magic for a second.
He's still playing his character from the murder party.
Watch out when Chris shakes your hand. He's trying to pump money out of your pocket.
Whoa!
Wow. All right.
How long do you think it took this guy to write this book?
20 years. This is a work of genius. This is like Ulysses. It requires study in schools.